independent in thought, and punk rock in life. It's The Chad Benson Show.
Welcome to The Chad Benson Show. I am not Chad Benson. I am Erik Erickson in for Chad this Thanksgiving week. The phone number, 844-DIG-CHAD. That's 844-344-2423. You can get me as well on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, you name it, although Facebook and Instagram have been offline parts of today, a story in and of itself. But I am at EW Erickson, EWERICK. SON. There is big news out. President Trump in an interview saying he is not going to punish Saudi Arabia or the Saudi crown prince for the Khashoggi killing. The president, in an interview just concluded, said that he sees no reason to disrupt the alliance, cast doubts on the CIA. I would not cast doubts on the CIA. It seems to me that it is very clear that the Saudis did have this individual killed. There apparently does exist audio where you can hear the Saudi Consul General in Turkey talking about it, complaining that his body was being carved up in his office. Nonetheless, I think this is the right decision by the president. You know, there are a lot of people who want to scuttle this relationship with Saudi Arabia. And they want to do it in large part in retribution for Saudi Arabia working with Israel to scuttle the Iran deal. It is their precious. Barack Obama is the precious of the media. And they are deeply, deeply aggrieved that this president scuttled the Iran deal. And in part, Saudi Arabia is blamed for that. This Khashoggi killing was unfortunate in that, well, he worked for an American news organization, and behind the scenes there should be some level of repercussions, even if they're not public. But two, it's unfortunate because it provided an opening for a lot of people in Europe and the United States who want to scuttle this deal to be able to scuttle this deal or provide them ammunition. The president digging in his heels on this issue is actually a good thing. It needed to be done because we need to preserve the alliance with Saudi Arabia and Israel against Iran. The Iranians are not our friends. If anything, this is a reintroduction of realpolitik by the president, that there are things we must do with people we may not like in order to keep things done. Here's the president a short time ago.
I let it go. And I said to myself, this is the business we've chosen.
Okay, maybe that's The Godfather, actually, but nonetheless, you get the point. This is the business that we've chosen. This is governmental politics on a global scale. Sometimes we have to side with nefarious people, bad people, people we don't like, people who do not share our values, to confront others who are even worse. And in this situation, the Iranians are far worse than the Saudis. We've got to have this alliance with Saudi Arabia. Now, the media is all upset about this because they've tied this to a different story. They've tied this to the president being upset with the media and calling the media the enemy of the people. The American media has concluded that the president's attacks on the media are on par with this situation, that if this was someone who wasn't a friend of the media, the president would be much more aggrieved. And maybe so. Maybe the president looks at this, and in fact, people in the White House have said on background that the president looked at this and said this wasn't an American citizen. He happened to be in the United States working for the Washington Post, but he wasn't an American. The killing did not happen in the United States. It happened in Turkey. The Turks could have stopped it. The Turks knew what was going on. The Turks are the ones who recorded the whole thing. They could have intervened, and they did not do that. And why should the United States involve itself in this? I tend to agree with that. We can condemn the killing. We can say it's wrong. We can, behind the scenes, take action on the Saudis to make it clear we're not happy about this. But why scuttle the alliance? The media wants to scuttle the alliance because many of the leading voices in the media were pawns of Barack Obama in the Iran deal. They don't like Saudi Arabia and they don't like Israel. They like Iran because they were sold a bill of goods by Barack Obama. They believed the propaganda and the lies from Barack Obama about Iraq or about Iran, and they're perfectly happy to sabotage any relationship we have with Saudi Arabia. not going to go over well with the media. You can expect a couple of days of outrage from the media. It's already happening right now. I've gotten 3 push alerts on my phone while I've been sitting here telling you about this. I've gotten push alerts from CNN, the New York Times, and the Wall Street Journal, all, of course, taking the spin that the president should do more. He should do something. Why should the president just do something? I'll tell you what else the media has all been out of shape about. That would be Ivanka Trump and her government emails. She apparently used a personal email account for her governmental emails. Listen to this audio.
It's on the list, but I don't know where it is in terms of the list. It also reveals that perhaps the critique of Hillary Clinton's emails wasn't perhaps principled. It was just simply political. But I think one of the things that comes to view, at least for me, is that the underlying concern about Hillary Clinton was a concern about the Clintons generally, that they thought themselves above the law. And here we have Ivanka Trump and the Trumps giving us evidence that they themselves believe they're above the law. This is just one more example of that fact.
That they believe they're above the law. Now, wait a second. This is notice how the media is beginning to spin the issue. It was never just about Hillary Clinton using private emails. We know that other members of the Obama administration did this. We know that members of the Bush administration did this, and we've long suspected that members of the Trump administration used private emails for government business. None of them should, by the way. We should be clear on that. None of them should. And this was a really dumb, unforced error, I think, on Ivanka Trump's part. She should not have done this knowing the outrage that would come. And in fact, the outrage is significant today. On CNN, on MSNBC, even on Fox News, they're all talking about this story, Ivanka Trump using her personal email account. The thing that makes this so egregious is that she and her attorney were allowed to go through the email account because it was a personal email account and determine what was and was not privileged conversation about her non-governmental business. But there's a key distinction here with the Clinton situation that the media doesn't seem to want to point out. They're talking about this is the president above the law. This is Ivanka Trump above the law. She did not use a personal email server in her basement bathroom. There is no evidence that she transmitted classified information on the server. There's not. There's no evidence of it. There is also no evidence that she deleted emails off the server when Congress came looking. There's not. Those are the big issues with Hillary Clinton that the media willfully chose to ignore. And they willfully chose to ignore it because all of these situations were out there, but this is vastly categorically different. There's no evidence of classified info. There's no private email server. For all I know, it was a Gmail account that Ivanka used. There's no private email server in the basement, and there's no mass deletion of emails when Congress issues a subpoena to see what's going on there. Major differences the media doesn't want to pursue. Of course, now what they're saying, it looks like it really was all opportunistic. You've got Democrats out there this morning chanting, lock her up, as payback for what the Trump administration did. It is farcical. It is nonsensical that the media refuses to distinguish between them. But it is to be expected that the media would do this, which is why it was rather a boneheaded move for Ivanka Trump to do this. She should not have used a private email server. It is the story today. And well, it was until the president. Maybe this is why the president came out with the Khashoggi story this afternoon saying that we're going to do nothing on Saudi Arabia because it requires the media to pivot from Ivanka Trump, because the only thing that can outrage the media more than Ivanka Trump looking like she's above the law is President Trump doing nothing to avenge the death of Khashoggi, the Washington Post reporter. And by the way, is it just me, or does it seem like the American media has for a very long time now wished desperately that President Trump would stop being aggressive worldwide? That he would treat our allies with respect. Or wait. I see how this works. They want the president to treat the white allies better. The American media wants him to treat European allies better. They want him to treat Canada better. but they don't seem concerned with his treatment of Saudi Arabia. Now, I realize there are progressive liberals listening to this program right now who are saying, well, they didn't murder a reporter for the Washington Post. So what do you want the president to do? What do liberals want the president to do with Saudi Arabia? Do they want him to sever all ties, recall the ambassador, bomb Mecca? I mean, what do you want the president to do? They're an ally. Doesn't mean we think that they're great people. If anything, we should be more emboldened in dealing with nefarious people who actually have our interests at heart. I mean, say what you will about Pinochet, but Pinochet, the dictator, what was he? Dictator in Chile Chile, I believe, Chile or Peru, Chile. He fought communists. He was a ruthless dictator, and he hated communists. That's a check mark next to his name in the good book, that he hated communists. And he dealt with them ruthlessly. And you know who would have dealt with him ruthlessly? The communists. The Che Guevara acolytes. Do you really think if the communists were in charge that they would have done anything differently? That they would have treated the people who wanted democracy and multi-party rule any differently? No, of course not. Of course not. It is delusional to think otherwise. The United States, when Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher were in charge of the Western Hemisphere, decided to strike up alliances with not very nice people because they recognized that the other people were far worse. And so people like Pinochet, people in alliances in Egypt, in Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, various other places around the world held back the communist tide. And now we've got this Iranian menace. Iran funding Hezbollah, terrorist groups in the Middle East and around the world. Iran turning a blind eye to ISIS, even though ISIS is Sunni, and Iranians tend to be Shiite, and the Sunnis and the Shiites tend to hate each other. Iran is perfectly happy to turn a blind eye to what ISIS is doing and ISIS to what Iran is doing, so long as all of them are targeting the United States and Western interests. And meanwhile, enter the fray Saudi Arabia and Israel, two countries that do not like each other, finding common ground to form an alliance with us against these other people. It seems like we should be wanting that to happen. It seems like we should be wanting this alliance. It seems like we should be willing to get our hands dirty or allow other countries to get their hands dirty to pursue interests that keep you, me, and everyone in this country complaining about the situation safe. What would the media have us do? Get rid of the alliance? Impose sanctions that would disrupt the alliance? There's really not a whole lot we can do. It's actually, believe it or not, a grown-up foreign policy being deployed by President Trump. Not that he'll get any credit for it. I'm Erik Erickson, in for Chad Benson. We'll be back.
Set Chad straight. Text the show, 323-538-2423. That's 323-538-CHAD. Someone has to do it. Might as well be you. The Chad Benson Show.
It is Erik Erickson in for Chad Benson. You can call in or you can reach me on social media at EW Erickson. Breaking news. This is profoundly huge. Breaking news right now from Newsweek. This is the headline. You may want to brace yourselves for this one. This is big. Headline from Newsweek. Men with muscles and money are more attractive to straight women and gay men, showing gender roles aren't progressing. No! Really? Y'all, they should have left Newsweek on the ash heap of history instead of trying to resurrect it. Goodness gracious. What a profoundly stupid headline. And yet they are pushing this story out. At least they are employing people who we should probably keep track of to make sure they never actually leave Newsweek and enter the workforce as a pretend legit journalist. Good gracious. Hey, this actually is a big story. NBC News breaking this story. The federal government has paid undercover informants inside the migrant caravan. Now what? I thought we weren't talking about the migrant caravan anymore. I thought it was just a Republican ploy before the election to rile up Republican voters. But no, the 4,000 migrants have used WhatsApp text message groups to communicate along the journey, and Department of Homeland Security personnel have joined those groups to gather information. This is Julia Ainsley from NBC News. The Department of Homeland Security is gathering intelligence from paid undercover informants inside the migrant caravan that is now reaching the California-Mexico border, as well as monitoring the text messages of migrants, according to 2 Department of Homeland Security officials. The 4,000 migrants, mainly from Honduras, have used WhatsApp text message groups as a way to organize and communicate along their journey to the California border. And Homeland Security personnel have joined those groups. The intelligent gathering techniques are combined with reports from Homeland Security personnel working in Mexico with the government there in an effort to keep tabs on the size, movements, and security threats within. So, for example, in the text messaging group WhatsApp, the migrants were organizing at a border crossing near San Diego. And one of the suggestions within the crowd was that they wanted to storm the car lanes of that border crossing and get into the United States through that. Sounds real peaceful, doesn't it? So border security shut down all northbound lanes between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m. as a result. Now, they never actually attempted that ambush, probably because the lanes were shut down and word got out. So we have paid informants. We have others traveling inside the caravan. Very interesting as to what's actually happening with this caravan. This was a smart from the Department of Homeland Security. Very, very smart idea from them, and we're learning about their movements. But there's a larger point here. NBC News is covering the story when the story had been that this wasn't a story, that it was only a political ploy. So for example, the border troops are being withdrawn. The president sent a number of soldiers to the border to secure the border, and now they're being released, going home, and people, what? This is clearly political. No. The caravan wound up steering towards California, where we actually have fencing and wall along the southern border there, south of San Diego, and they're trying to storm border crossings there. We already have troops, National Guard, and local Border Patrol agents deployed, so the soldiers weren't needed. You wouldn't know that from the media coverage, though. All of the media coverage has been about how this was a real ploy. We'll be back.
The Chad Benson Show.
Independent in thoughts and punk rock in life. It's the Chad Benson Show.
It is Erik Erickson in for Chad Benson. Welcome back. The phone number 844-DIG-CHAD. You can get me on social media at EW Erickson. There's a fascinating story at Vox.com, and I am loath to go to Vox, which is a left-wing site, and for some reason they're able to get groups like General Electric and others to advertise on the site while having writers on the site who are totally okay with the harassment of conservatives, the harassment of Tucker Carlson's family and others. You had Matthew Iglesias from Vox totally being okay with that, and General Electric basically generates the salary for these people, among other sponsors. And is General Electric even still in business? I'm Googling in real time. Good God almighty. Their stock price is $7.64. You are kidding. Talk about a holy cow, a relic. Goodness gracious, it had been almost up to $19 at the beginning of the year, and wow, what was it? I'm sorry, yeah, just a few years ago it was over $30, and now we're For goodness gracious, we're down to $7.64. It's down another 2%. Goodness gracious. Wow. And yet they're funding Vox, a left-wing site that comes up with a bunch of nonsense, much of it inaccurate. And I say all of that to say there's actually a fairly interesting piece there by Jane Coaston, who is a progressive writer who actually does her best to try to understand conservatives, though for some reason she has some real issue with Ben Shapiro, it seems. But she writes, the headline is How California Conservatives Became the Intellectual Engine of Trumpism. The California GOP got wiped out in the midterms. Yes, indeed. But the heart of California-style conservatism is stronger than ever. And essentially, her thesis is that California conservatism is basically fight-at-all-costs conservatism. Breitbart News was founded in Los Angeles and its headquarters remains in the city's Brentwood Heights neighborhood. The Claremont Colleges, located on the eastern side of Los Angeles County, were the birthplace of intellectual Trumpism, and the Flight 93 Election, an influential essay published in the Claremont Review of Books. And in September, she traveled the length of the Golden State, stopping at conservative outposts. And one common theme emerged: conservatives living and working in California view themselves as philosophically, culturally, and demographically under siege. And the political movement they are ideating, advocating, and building reflects that fully. I don't know that I would, and this is at Vox, so you do have to take it with a grain of salt, but there is a good bit to chew on, and I don't know that I buy all of her efforts to paint conservatism with this. Essentially, she's making the entire premise that conservatism as a whole is reflective of what has happened with conservatives in California. And really, the whole underlying thing here is essentially don't worry, Republicans are going to be wiped out nationally just like they were in California. I don't know that that is true, because one of the things that she misses is Texas. And Texas is an alternative brand of conservatism, although Texas Republicans seem to be embracing some of the shrillness of California conservatives who kind of went off the rails with immigration, really helped center a Black Hispanic alliance in California that went with the Democrats when it wasn't necessarily so back in the Pete Wilson days in the 90s. And Texas, I think, does have to be careful. And there is some mythology in the competing track of happening in Texas. Here's Alan West on TV the other day, former congressman. Listen to this.
If you recall, when Governor Rick Perry was here, he was traveling around the country and going to many blue states, and he was talking about moving to Texas because of the economic environment. The conservative policies here have allowed for, the incredible economic growth, a vibrancy. But what is interesting is that as these individuals and these corporations are leaving places like California, Illinois, New York, New Jersey, you have it, they are bringing the same failed ideology with them. And that is what you see that's very disconcerting.
I've actually got to disagree with this. I hear this a lot from conservatives. Oh, my goodness, all these people are fleeing California and they're bringing California values with them. The adjusted exit polling shows otherwise. And let me pause here for a moment and give you some terminology that I'm using. So there are exit polls and there are adjusted exit polls. Exit polls are pretty terrible garbage. You cannot read the exit polls and make a determination as to what has actually happened on Election Day. Then there are the adjusted exit polls. The adjusted exit polls are actually really, really, really good. So with exit polling, the adjusted exits are based on the exit polling. Essentially what happens is upwards of 2,000 to 3,000 people tend to be surveyed in locations around the country. So that's not 2,000 people nationwide. It's 2,000 people in Texas, 2,000 people in Georgia, 2,000 people in Florida, or 3,000 or 4,000, however many people want to volunteer. What happens is exit pollsters look at precincts around the country that are very, very swingy, or counties that are very, very swingy. So, for example, Baldwin County, Georgia, near where I am, Baldwin County, Georgia is the swingiest of swing counties in the state of Georgia. It goes Democrat one year, Republican the next year, Democrat the next year, Republican after that. It's a college town, has an influx of college kids. It's actually fairly conservative. There's a military college there. The college students tend to be very conservative. It is very, very, very swingy. Every state has counties like that. And so they'll place pollsters there on election day. And they will hold up signs indicating that they're an exit pollster and would you please talk to them? And you go talk to them after you voted. And they don't ask you who you voted for. They're not allowed to ask you who you voted for. What they're allowed to ask is what drove you to vote. What are the issues? Do you like the president? Do you not like the president? Did not liking the president influence the way you voted? So they get all the exit polling data, and it's not adjusted to weight, because you see what happens is there's not just a pollster standing there. There's a demographer standing with the pollster in many cases. And they're checking to see how many white people showed up here, how many black people, how many men, how many women, how many Hispanic people. And so what they do then is, based on the exit polling data, they go back through and they adjust it. Well, we may, in the 2,000 people we interviewed, 55% of them may have been white, but actually in this precinct, 60% of the people who showed up were Hispanic. So they're going to adjust the weighting of the people who were interviewed by the pollsters to make it more accurately reflect. You're going to give a greater value to the Hispanic voters who participated with the exit polling. And as a result, what you get from the adjusted exit polling is a very detailed survey from a large number of people about how they viewed the election. And you get a good weighting in the adjustment, and it turns out the exit polls tend to be very accurate, far more accurate than a call on your phone and ask you who you're going to vote for poll prior to the election. So you pay attention to the adjusted exits because they're based on real voters who actually went to polling locations and actually voted. And then a real demographer was there observing and adjusting the polling. So it was no longer a speculation of, we think that 29% of the electorate is going to be black. No. Actually, 29% of the voters who showed up were black. Therefore, we're going to adjust the exit polling to reflect that. So you can pay attention to the adjusted exits. Now, that's a very long explanation, but I need you to understand that, because there are so many people, when I say adjusted exits, they either don't know what it's talking about, or they're like, oh, those exit polls, the exit polls are always wrong. No, the adjusted exit polls are always right. And that leads me back to Alan West. His thesis is the thesis that I am hearing from a lot of conservatives, that the reason Texas was so close, the reason the Ted Cruz race was so close, the reason so many other races were so close, was because all of these people who have moved into Texas from out of state because of the economy, they're bringing their values with them. And the socialists from California who are moving to Texas are voting like they're still in California, and they're going to ruin Texas. And the adjusted exit polling shows that is not true. The most reliably conservative voters in Texas in 2018 were the people who moved to the state from California and other liberal utopias. That's right. The people moving to Texas, by and large, are people moving to Texas because they are abandoning the socioeconomic and political structures of other states. And they want Texas, and they want Texas values. It was the white native Texans who abandoned Ted Cruz and the GOP. It was the white native Texans in urban areas who decided they were going to vote for Beto O'Rourke. It was the white native Texans who decided that they were going to vote in Texas. This was the last year they did it. But in Texas, you could vote Republican or Democrat at the top of the ticket and never have to vote for an individual candidate. They're getting rid of that, and that wiped out Republicans across the board. It's kind of funny. It was Democrats in Texas back in the early 90s who put that on the ballot where people could just vote Democrat, straight party voting. You didn't have to vote for individual candidates. And then one day Texas woke up and decided it was Republican and started hurting the Democrats. Well, now in urban areas in Texas, it's hurting the Republicans, so they're getting rid of that option on the ballot. You got to vote per candidate. You got to learn the candidates, which is actually good. I hate straight party ticket. I've never voted straight party until this year. Actually, this year in Georgia was my first time ever voting straight Republican. Usually there's a local Democratic race where there is no good Republican, and you got to vote Democrat. Not this time. But this is a mythology I'm hearing from Republicans, and they need to get over it because unlike Jane Coaston's premise that Republicans are going the way of California Republicans, which is to say extinct, Texas has a better way. It is a more hopeful, more optimistic, more individual, less railing against change conservatism. The conservatism of California that she puts her finger on is a conservatism of rejection of the status quo. It is a conservatism of rejection of immigrants. It is essentially we're the last remaining white conservatives in California, and we want to keep it that way, conservatism. That's how it's cast. Texas conservatives, Arizona conservatives, Georgia conservatives that aren't that way. And to the extent that the Democrats are consoling themselves saying 2020 is going to be different because these are an endangered species, they're going to be wiped out, don't worry about it, relax, I don't think you can actually extrapolate that far. What's so amazing to me is that there is, as much as I think there are factual conclusions that Coaston gets wrong here, there are some basic premises that I think are reflected within Donald Trump's Republican Party right now. There is an aggressive need to fight back at all costs, an aggressive belief that they're not really winning no matter how much they're winning, and that hurt the Republican Party in California in the day. What we're seeing with the rejection of conservatives, with the rejection of Republicans, with the rejection of Trump by suburban voters is the angry clash and willingness to fight. These voters don't want to fight. They want to be left alone. And to the extent that the Republicans in 2020 rebuild ground with the suburban voters, they're going to need to take the premise of we want you back, and we want you back by leaving you alone. We want you back by being the party that doesn't force our values on you. We want you back by being the party that doesn't try to wreck your economy, wreck your job, and wreck your local community. Let local values stand. The Democrats don't want to do that. The Republicans can, and they can get back the suburban voters by just saying we're going to leave you the heck alone. That'll woo them back. You got to get over the anger, though, because I don't understand why everybody's so angry right now. There's a point to be said on that, but we'll have to deal with that when we come back. Erik Erickson in for Chad Benson.
Welcome to the Alt-Middle, where solutions live and ignorance dies. The Chad Benson Show.
It is Erik Erickson in for Chad Benson. Amazon, according to CNBC, has placed a first-round bid for Disney's 22 regional sports networks. They want to buy the sports networks. If Bob Iger were to accept the bid, he's the CEO of Disney, he could be paving the way for the demise of traditional cable TV networks, including ESPN, which Disney owns. So Amazon wants to buy these. Disney is forced to divest them as part of its Fox assets. They include the Yes Network, which broadcasts Yankees games, and live regional games for a variety of professional leagues, including Major League Baseball, the National Basketball Association, and the National Hockey League. Maybe AT&T should buy them and put them under Time Warner or some such. This is a little bit scary in that. So I love Amazon. I do. I really like Amazon, but I am more and more concerned with Amazon's growing power. And I'm not I'm not someone who believes we should break up Amazon, but I am a little bit troubled with companies like Amazon and their ability to really capture business by lowering prices in ways other companies can't compete with. And then once their competition is wiped out, raise prices and essentially becoming more and more of an online monopoly. They are, to a degree, an online monopoly. I say online monopoly in particular because they are the behemoth. I mean, neither Walmart nor Target nor other companies like that can effectively compete with the access and supply chain power of Amazon. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but when I see liberals like Bezos in charge of these things, I get a little bit nervous. I think we all should. When we come back, I want to spend a little more time on this voter anger issue. I hadn't planned on it, but there's also some big news I helped break today. Marcia Fudge, who's challenging California's own Nancy Pelosi for Speaker, she wrote a letter for a friend of hers asking for leniency. And this past weekend, that friend murdered his wife in front of his kids. I got the letter first and got it out there today. A friend of mine from Ohio leaked it to me. But real quick, before we go to break, your Thanksgiving gravy. I want to give you the secret. If you want to get my recipes, text the word recipe to 345-345. Every Wednesday I send out recipes by email. Don't sell your email or anything like that. Just send out recipes. And gravy is the one I'm known for. Here's the trick. Brown onions in a stick of butter, half an onion in a stick of butter for 30 minutes on medium heat until they get nice and brown. That means they get really sweet and caramelized. And then pour in a quarter cup of flour, stir it for 5 minutes till it gets brown, and then add 2 cups of stock. And there's your gravy. Don't put the flour in the water. Put the flour in the butter so it doesn't get lumpy, and you won't have lumpy gravy. That's the trick. And then when you're done, add a tablespoon of heavy cream to just make it rich. Erik Erickson in for Chad Benson. We'll be back.
This is the Chad Benson Show. Independent in thought and punk rock in life. It's the Chad Benson Show.
It's Erik Erickson in for Chad Benson. Happy Thanksgiving to you all. When I am off the air, I will be up all night cooking. I was up all night last night cooking. I made a pound cake, and it should have been baked at 300 degrees, and I baked it at 350, and it came out tough. So tough it was like a brick. I had to throw it away. So I was up until 1 o'clock Eastern time this morning making a double-layer yellow cake with chocolate fudge icing for the kids. Today I've got a brisket on. I've made brisket barbecue sauce. I got to do chicken and dumplings this evening. Got to get the turkey out of the freezer, start thawing it out. It's going to be busy. But right now the news is busy. Let's get to it. Marcia Fudge, a congresswoman from Ohio, wants to challenge Nancy Pelosi. Now, here's the problem for Pelosi. Progressives don't – there's not a huge love lost between Nancy Pelosi and a lot of the progressives. Even though Nancy Pelosi considers herself liberal, the liberals just don't care for her. They want a fresh face. The Democrats in Congress have a problem. It is this. They are old. The ranking members are prehistoric. In fact, in this past Congress, every single chairman of every single committee run by Republicans had a chairman who was younger than their Democrat counterpart, some by 20 years. I mean, the Democrats are ancient. Nancy Pelosi is old. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just you've got this injection of fresh blood. Democrats eager to score points against the Republicans, and they're old. So the progressives don't much care for her. The moderates think that Pelosi is bad for business. There are 16 moderate Democrats who have signed a letter saying they will oppose Nancy Pelosi for the speakership. Now, this is important because the Democrats have a 16-seat majority right now. They may get 18 seats. And actually, of those 16 people, one of them actually wound up losing, so it was a 15-person. There's a real problem there for Nancy Pelosi. If the Republicans were to swing their votes towards a more moderate Democrat, they could potentially disrupt it. Or if the Republicans decided just for the heck of it to go with a far left progressive, they could totally undermine Nancy Pelosi. They could cause all sorts of squabbling on the Democratic side. Well, Marcia Fudge has come out, the congresswoman from Ohio, as someone who wants to get elected or wants to be Speaker of the House of Representatives. She's been put up by moderate Democrats. Progressives hate her because though she is very pro-union and though she is relatively liberal, Marcia Fudge has a history of opposing gay marriage and transgender rights. She is a moderate black Democrat from Ohio. An area and type of Democrats need to win in 2020, and the progressives don't want her. Well, they're not going to have to worry about Marcia Fudge now. Nancy Pelosi is not going to have to worry about Marcia Fudge now. I actually broke the story. And, I found the letter. It was sent to me by a source in Ohio. I put it up, and then a local news station grabbed the letter and ran with it. But nonetheless, I don't need credit for it. It's an interesting story. There is a judge in Ohio, Cuyahoga County, Ohio, Lance Mason. In 2014, Lance Mason was charged with spousal abuse and assault. He really savagely beat his wife in front of his kids. He punched his wife 20 times. The end of 2014. During his prison sentencing in August of 2015 after his trial, Marcia Fudge wrote a letter to the Cuyahoga County Prosecutor's Office, Tim McGinty, the prosecutor. Let me read you the letter. This letter of support on behalf of Lance T. Mason comes as a result of more than 20 years of friendship. Most assuredly, I am deeply saddened and disappointed at where we find ourselves today. The behavior Lance displayed on August 2nd, 2014 is out of character and totally contrary to everything I know about him. I commend Lance for immediately recognizing that he needed help in entering counseling, which continues as part of this writing. Further, he's working diligently to find a way to face what he has done to his family and his reputation. Lance accepts full responsibility for his actions and has assured me that something like this will never happen again. The Lance T. Mason I know is a kind, intelligent man and loyal friend. The Lance T. Mason I know is an advocate for the people of his community. Whether as a county prosecutor, state senator, or common pleas judge, Lance T. Mason is well respected and well liked. Lance Mason is a good man who made a very bad mistake. I can only hope that you see in Lance what I and others see. I thank you for your consideration in this matter. Sincerely, Marcia L. Fudge. Was not signed as a congresswoman. She signed it in an individual capacity. But it was for Lance Mason, who savagely beat his wife. In fact, according to the New York Times, Lance Mason went on to serve 9 months in prison for brutally beating his wife in 2014 in front of their children, punching her 20 times and fracturing a bone in her face. Marcia Fudge defended that guy. This is the same Lance Mason who this weekend held down his estranged wife and put a bullet through her head in front of his children. Yes. Actually, I take that back. It wasn't a shooting. It was a stabbing. He stabbed her to death. Wrong case. That's right. He was driving a sport utility vehicle away from his sister's house, slammed into an officer's patrol car after stabbing his wife in front of their children. I don't think Marcia Fudge will be Speaker of the House of Representatives now. The progressives didn't want her to begin with. I think this pretty much scuttles her campaign against the Democrats. The Democrats, though, man, they are going to squabble amongst themselves. Listen, this is from MSNBC on the Pelosi fight.
Well, we're heading into a messy early January because it would appear from that letter that this group has enough members to prevent Nancy Pelosi, who will get the majority of the caucus vote to be the speaker, from actually becoming the speaker on the floor. And as I've urged some people that I know in that group to think about, then what? Look, there's a whole conversation to be had about whether the Democratic leadership, is changing fast enough. There are obviously younger members who are interested in positions that are not those top three positions. That's a very fair conversation to have. But I've been encouraging people I know on that letter to ask themselves, what's the plan? No one has emerged to challenge Nancy Pelosi, which would be the right way to actually set up a leadership race. And do they imagine that if they prevent her, as maybe they can, from becoming speaker, whoever is behind Nancy Pelosi in that instance comes into a unified caucus? So anyway, I will see how this all plays out. There's a lot of time between now and the New Year's when we're taking this vote. But it does seem to me that this is, I guess the right analogy is this is a pretty ugly game of chicken that is being set up in a way that could damage something that I think needs to be really supported, which is democratic unity.
Democratic unity, all about the Democratic unity. Now, those are the 16 people, really 15, who don't want Pelosi from the moderate wing of the party. There are some progressives who are saying it is misogynistic, sexist, bigoted for the moderates to not support Pelosi. But there are other progressives saying, hey, we need a new face here. She's not as progressive as we need to be. Pelosi herself is ruffling feathers by saying she opposes the progressive idea of abolishing ICE. And she has come out now opposing impeaching Donald Trump. That is ruffling the feathers of major Democratic donors. It's going to be a fight behind the scenes. I don't think it's actually going to be public. I think it's going to be behind the scenes. Meanwhile, the Democrats are still out suggesting that the election was fraudulent, particularly in Georgia. I have mentioned this, but, Stacey Abrams, the Democratic governor, she is still out now saying that the election was illegitimate and stolen. The New York Times yesterday, the Washington Post yesterday, CNN yesterday, they all did stories about how Republicans are undermining people's faith in democracy by calling into question the election. That's the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN saying these things. And yet it's not the Republicans calling the election into question. Here's a panel on MSNBC. Now, listen, if you're driving in your car right now, keep your hands on the wheel because you may be tempted to throw your hands up on either side of your head to keep your brain from exploding when you hear these people. But just keep your car steady. Your head may explode, but just listen to this nonsense.
Counts, they never go Republicans' way. 2000 election.
I know. Was that very score?
Bush v. Gore.
I know. That's it.
He doesn't remember that. It's not that hard to remember.
And it's shameful that he would do it. It's shameful that Marco Rubio should pile on, who has apparently become, the next cheerleader in the category of Mike Pence never does anything that he has any problems with. It is shameful. The National Republican Senate Committee is also doing the same thing in Arizona, where it is clear that the Democrat is pulling away. And they are still trying to defame the local official who's an ex-Marine of some kind of nefarious activity. This is shameful. All of this does is defeat the integrity, damage the integrity of elections. This is what they used to call useful idiots in the Soviet era.
Useful idiots on MSNBC. Now, I play that clip from you from the other day where the Democrats are, how dare the Republicans call into doubt any of this? How dare the Republicans suggest this wasn't a legitimate election? Here's Sam Stein today on MSNBC.
This is a very tricky conversation because on the one hand, obviously, you want to make sure there's trust in the system and the outcomes, and you want to be able to accept the final tally. On the other hand, you can't just ignore everything that precluded that. So when you have 1.5 million people purged from the rolls, if you have 53,000 people held up on their registration, if you have 4.5-hour lines to just vote, if you have the Secretary of State overseeing his own election, those all also add to a sense of distrust in the process. So you can't just say, okay, we have this incredibly difficult process. It seems potentially problematic that the Secretary of State's overseeing his election, but when it's all done, we have to accept it. No, you have to actually build the trust up in order for you to have the trust. Now, I think ultimately the answer is people just have to make it easier to vote. You have to provide the machinery, the locations. You have to make it easier for people to get to the polls. You have to make it easier for people to register. Once you do that, you can restore trust because then you know democracy is more full.
Right. Democracy is more full. Here's Stacey Abrams.
It was not a free and fair election. We had thousands of Georgians who were purged from the rolls wrongly, including a 92-year-old woman who had voted in the same area since 1968, a civil rights leader. It was not fair to the thousands who were forced to wait in long lines because they were in polling places that were under-resourced. Or worse, they had no polling places to go to because more than 300 had been closed. It was not fair to the thousands that were put on hold with their registrations. And it was not fair to those who filled out absentee ballots, and depending on the county you sent it to, it either was counted or not counted, assuming you received it in time.
Oh, good grief. All local elections issues, by the way, the Secretary of State had nothing to do with it. Individual counties. It's as if they think that every election was perfect until the Republicans were in charge. No, that's not how it worked. And it was all local elections officials. But facts don't matter to the Democrats now that the election is over and they get to say the election was stolen. Just like they were upset with Donald Trump for suggesting the election might not be carried out legitimately in 2016. And then after he won, Democrats have invested all of their energy in claiming he's an illegitimate president. Hypocrisy knows no bounds. Erik Erickson in for Chad Benson. We'll be back.
Experiencing separation anxiety? That's dumb. Check out Chad 24/7 at his website, ChadBensonShow.com, and on iTunes, free. The Chad Benson Show. Never feel lonely again.
This is just an absurd story to me. Welcome back. It is Erik Erickson in for Chad Benson, particularly with the holidays approaching, Thanksgiving 2 days away. Kansas City, Missouri, the health department there has been pouring bleach on food meant for the homeless and discarding it so that it could not be eaten. Why? According to the health department, the food prepared by homeless advocates wasn't cooked in an approved kitchen, nor did the group have a license to feed the homeless. Licensing in the... I am not a libertarian. I am not a libertarian in large part because I think government does have a role in taking care of the poor and needy, that there needs to be a social safety net. That's why I'm a conservative. Doesn't need to be as large as progressives want. Not everyone should be allowed to get on it. We should go back to having a category of people called the deserving poor, not just the poor, but the people who, not through bad life decisions, but through physical or mental impairment, actually need society's help to get along. I believe that. But my goodness, there is a portion of me that has a libertarian zeal for complete deregulation of licensing institutions. The idea that a group of people cannot come together to feed homeless people, to do a duty that supplants the government through private care, and they're not allowed to do it because they didn't get appropriate governmental regulatory approval, is insane. It is insane. One of the great problems we have in this country is that so many sectarian institutions who for a long time served the role of caretaker of the needy have been replaced by government bureaucracy And so more and more churches have abandoned that sphere of influence. Most of the churches that do this in this country, most of the nonprofit groups that continue to take care of and feed the homeless are progressively sectarian institutions that no longer feed the soul as well as the body. They feed the body and think that they are bringing heaven on earth. It is a complete abdication of the role of the church. But more than that, it is individuals now creating dependency on the government when there are willing people willing to stand up and take care of these things, and yet the government itself refuses to let them. It is mind-numbing. And people who can't get a job because of onerous licensing restrictions, they just burn it all down, the regulatory regime. All right, Erik Erickson in for Chad Benson. When we come back, why are people still so angry? We'll explore it.
Chad Benson Show.
Independent in thoughts and punk rock in life. It's the Chad Benson Show.
It's Erik Erickson in for Chad Benson. 844-DIG-CHAD is the phone number. Why are people so angry right now? I mentioned earlier the Jane Coaston piece from Vox about angry California Republicans, that as they have been losing, they have gotten angrier, and that anger has essentially infected the conservative movement and conservative thought. And conservatives continue to fight and fight and fight and fight. And instead of making their case persuasively to lure independents, they become very, very angry. And I mean, obviously, the part of the whole point here is to reassure progressives that 2020 will be okay. They're just too angry to win. But at the same time, progressives in this country, leftists, are deeply angry. Look at Antifa, the kissing cousins of the alt-right. Deeply angry they are, violent even, really, really viscerally angry at the direction of the country. But they were angry after Barack Obama won. I mean, go back to 2009. The progressive left was angry after Barack Obama won. They were angry with Republicans. When Democrats controlled the House, the Senate, and the White House, progressive activists were still very angry. Here's the reality. It is the cold, hard truth of 2018. No one's life has been materially made worse by Donald Trump, except perhaps illegal immigrants who have been deported from this country. If you are an American citizen, your life is not materially worse. If you're a left-wing activist, guess what? Planned Parenthood, it's still funded. Obamacare, still the law of the land. You've got more take-home pay because of the tax cuts. Your employer probably has more money and probably is not laying you off right now. There's no threat or worry of being laid off. Your life really isn't at a disadvantage right now, and yet you are angry. And conservatives are angry as well. And I've got this sense that part of the anger has a lot to do with the fact that people feel like the world is out of their hands. Now, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. In fact, a friend of mine once said to me that there are no – he was on the Warren Commission that investigated the Kennedy assassination, which happened, by the way, this week, the anniversary of it. He pointed out accurately that no one in this country can keep a secret, so it's real hard to believe they're conspiracies. And a lot of people who do believe conspiracies in this country are people who I've used this before, and people get mad at me when I say it, but I'm going to say it again. And I don't mean to offend you when I say it, but there are people who have failed at life. They have made poor decisions for themselves. And instead of trying to make good decisions or recognizing the error of their ways, they would rather blame other people for their predicament. whether it's the man or their company boss or what have you. So I was a lawyer for 6 years, did mostly corporate transactions and elections. But where I worked, I had to be an indigent defense attorney, which meant I had to represent largely pro bono. It was a very, very discounted rate. Criminal indigent defendants who could not pay for a lawyer. Now, I didn't no capital crimes. They actually got specialized lawyers. But my very, very first case out of law school as an indigent defense attorney was representing a man who believed that the police planted the crack cocaine under his driver's seat. And I asked him if he could describe the person who did it, and he said he looked like the man. Who was this man? Well, according to this defendant, that man looked like me. So someone who looked like me, his defense attorney, planted crack cocaine under his driver's seat. I'll never forget. I went to court and I was like, my goodness, I'm going to have to ask for a psych evaluation. This guy has psychological issues. I need to get this looked at. And so we're in court. We're at the calendar call to see if we could proceed to trial, if we could deal. He wasn't pleading. There was no way he was pleading because the man put the crack cocaine under his seat and the man looked like me. So I went up to the judge and I said, Your Honor, I need a psych evaluation on this guy. And she asked me what the problem is. I said, well, he says a man planted crack cocaine under his driver's seat. And when I asked him what this man looked like, he says, the man looks like me. And she motioned me out of the way. Judge Christian did. She told the man to stand up. And she says, sir, do you mean the man? And the guy says, yeah, the man. And she looked at me. She says, Mr. Erickson, your client's not crazy. He's racist. He thinks the white man planted crack cocaine under the driver's seat. It's like, oh, this is news to me. This guy made a terrible life decision and concocted this conspiracy of the man, the police, planted the crack cocaine. That was his excuse. He wound up pleading guilty and going to jail, but not for nearly as long as he should have. All people just continue to, people feel like they've lost control of their lives and they get really, really angry. They make up conspiracy theories about how someone else made their life miserable. They can't take responsibility for themselves. And a great deal of it in politics is because Washington is so far away and nobody really changes Washington. Whether you're a conservative or a liberal, a Democrat or Republican, you're not really changing Washington. Democrats, your lives have not been materially ruined by Donald Trump being elected. Republicans, your lives have not been materially improved by Donald Trump getting elected. Washington is Washington. I have mentioned before, I'm in seminary. We're going to my PhD. I'm in a reform seminary. I spend more time in public now instead of giving speeches, actually preaching on Sundays, which I really like. It's a great distraction from politics. I really love to boost my knowledge of theology and talk about faith and culture as much as politics. And I think there's a longing for this. One of the things I tell conservative groups, though, when I'm not preaching, when I'm speaking, weaving it in a little bit, is Jeremiah, the prophet, tells people to seek the welfare of the city in which you're in exile, and there you'll find your welfare. And we don't live in Washington, D.C. If you live in Washington, D.C., this doesn't apply to you. For everyone else, Washington, D.C., whether 700 miles away or 2,000 miles away, you should look to your local community. We have, as we head into this Thanksgiving, and we are going to be surrounded, hopefully, by family and friends for Thanksgiving, by and large, we have lost our sense of local community. We've lost our sense of who our neighbor is. We've lost our sense of who lives across the street from us. We don't know about the homeless man who lives under the bridge down the street. We don't care what goes on with our local school board, with our local city council, with our local county commission. We are solely focused on Washington, D.C. And as we cannot change Washington, D.C., we get more angry with Washington, D.C., and particularly because right now the left doesn't control the House, the Senate, or the White House. And after January, it will only control the House of Representatives, and barely by maybe 17 or 18 votes. They are increasingly antagonistic and angry, because they feel like every life-changing decision originates from Washington, D.C. And that's not actually true, but it is our mindset, because the media, talk radio, myself, we all fixate on Washington, D.C. This is a national talk show. We talk about national issues, and those issues come from Washington, D.C. But I tell you the truth, if you want to find happiness in politics, seek the welfare of the place in which you're in exile. Seek the welfare of the city where you live. And there you'll find your welfare. There you will find ways to improve your life. And when you focus on the local, you suddenly find ways to tangibly improve your life. But not only that, there is in this country right now a growing hostility toward people of faith. And I tell my Christian friends and my Orthodox Jewish friends and Muslim friends, you need to get involved in your local community. Because there, not only will you find your welfare, but by improving the welfare of the city, the people around you will see that you actually care. And they will be the ones to not judge you based on your faith, but based on your commitment to the community. Show your commitment to the community. Be involved in your local community. I do not understand parents who are not involved in their kids' education. Do you know the two ways to virtually guarantee your child will be an A student? One is to make sure your child sits in the front of the classroom. Kids in the front of a classroom actually perform better than kids who sit in the back of a classroom. The number two way to make sure that your kids are virtually an A student guaranteed is to be involved with your kid. Work with them on their homework, make sure they've done their homework, make sure they're doing their homework right, review their homework with them. Your kid's going to get an A. Not because you're doing the homework for them, because you're making sure that they develop a work ethic of getting it right every time. In the same way, you got to involve yourself in your local community politically. You got to go sit in the front row of the county commission meeting and find out what's going on. You got to be willing to show up at planning and zoning and say, you know what, I don't think we need the mega box corp building inside this neighborhood that's residential. Go to the school board when they bring out the sexual unicorn for your elementary school kid to learn. Maybe, just maybe, you want to stand up and say, why? I just don't think that we should be as obsessed about national politics as so many of us are. There are other things to talk about. There are other things to explore. There are other things to worry about. And by worrying about Washington and seeing that Washington doesn't really change, people just get more angry than they should. So I would encourage you all, frankly, when you're around Thanksgiving, number one, don't talk about politics. Find other things to talk about. There's no reason to talk about politics. I see liberals all the time, particularly during the Obama years. It was one of those things, when your crazy uncle wants to talk about politics at Thanksgiving, here's what you should do. Well, the number one answer is don't talk politics at Thanksgiving. Talk about family. Talk about life. Talk about movies. Go see a movie. The Wreck-It Ralph sequel is coming out tomorrow. My entire family intends to go see. If you've never seen Wreck-It Ralph, it's actually a really good movie. Disney movie. Go see Ralph Breaks the Internet. This comes out tomorrow. But just find other things to talk about than politics. We spend so much time with it. And you know something else to do is if you got a small child, go get them vaccinated. There's a story, I am just appalled by this story. Talk about a change. Vaccine. There's a huge outbreak of chickenpox and measles in North Carolina because parents did not get their kids vaccinated because they didn't believe in the vaccines. They bought the mythology and the conspiracy theories about the vaccines. Second only to California. California apparently has had the largest outbreak of measles and chickenpox in the last decade because of parents in Southern California, particularly in the Los Angeles area and the Beverly Hills area, no less, refusing to get their kids vaccinated, thinking that would cause autism, believing that Jenny McCarthy, she's not a doctor, Jenny McCarthy, she's a comedian, and not a very funny one at that. And yet people are believing her, believing stuff they read on Facebook instead of believing the media. Now, part of the problem is the media, but this goes full circle to conspiracy theories. People are convinced of conspiracy theories these days. They are convinced the man is out to get them, just like my client who thought the man planted crack cocaine under his seat. I'm shocked by the number of friends I have who have gone into essential oils and are convinced that they can cure cancer. I actually got it, and my wife has an incurable form of cancer, and I'm shocked at the number of people who tell her if you mix this oil blend together and drink it, it'll cure your cancer. No, it won't. It's a genetic form of cancer. There's no cure for it. We keep it in remission with a pill by modern medicine. And then there are the number of people who are convinced that it's a conspiracy theory, that those cancer companies, they could come up with the cure and cure the cancer, except they make so much money off of her, they don't want to cure it. That in and of itself is nonsense. It is people who would rather believe the lie than face the truth. Sometimes the truth doesn't work out for you. Sometimes it's your fault. Sometimes bad things happen to good people. They just do. It's not a conspiracy. It's not people out to get you. It's not Washington being out of control. It just happens. And the key to happiness in life is really being able to face reality and process it as real and not conjure up imaginary people who are trying to do you in when that's not actually happening. There's so much to be happy about instead of fixating on Washington and coming up with conspiracy theories to explain life. You know what? Just live life. Don't try to explain it. I'm Erik Erickson, in for Chad Benson. We'll be back.
No fake outrage here, just the real thing. The Chad Benson Show.
It is Erik Erickson in for Chad Benson. My goodness gracious, folks. I make the mistake of looking at social media, and I have found in my own radio show, I've got a radio show in Atlanta, Georgia, evening drive time, no less. Lots of people stuck in their cars listening to me, trying to get them home in the evening, and I have found the two topics that just incite people more than any other: vaccines and Chick-fil-A. And sure enough, mentioning people not vaccinating their kids, having a huge chickenpox and measles outbreak in North Carolina, and it's always the defensive parents who, I don't believe in it, we don't need it. You know, I trust modern medicine. I do. Modern medicine is keeping my wife alive. Modern medicine keeping me alive. I trust modern medicine. And just because you don't understand it doesn't mean there's conspiracy. It's kind of like the Democrats in Georgia or nationwide who are convinced that there's voter fraud in Georgia. They have no understanding of Georgia election law. As a result of not understanding the law, they are convinced that there's some huge conspiracy to steal the election. And in being convinced of this huge conspiracy to steal the election, they get themselves spun up into all these conspiracies of it was racist, suppressing the black vote. It was people breaking voting machines so they couldn't vote and cause long lines. And the same thing goes into this. We don't understand modern medicine, therefore there must be a conspiracy. Which, you know, relatedly, I'm reading this. There's a fascinating profile of exorcists at the Atlantic. Now, I think this is something Protestants don't do as well as Catholics, acknowledging actual evil and demons. I'm totally down with belief in it. What's so interesting to me is that as belief in God has declined in this country, belief in demons has actually gone up in this country. Very, very bizarre correlation there. And I'm sure there's a cause effect there. Just people are willing to believe in bad stuff. And basically this entire article, it interviews people who allege to have been possessed and just how skeptically the Catholic Church treats it. You have to have gone through multiple mental and physical medical evaluations, psychological evaluations, and have everything ruled out before the church will take it seriously. But here's the thing, and I've heard this for a while from friends of mine who are involved behind the scenes in the Catholic Church here in the United States, that the requests for exorcisms in this country has gone up. And sure enough, this story in the Atlantic confirms it. Just a very bizarre tale. I'm not even sending something out like this on Twitter. You got to go find it yourself at The Atlantic if you want to read it, but it is a very fascinating story. But it's kind of the interplay in the unknown, and people, they blame malevolent forces when they don't understand what's going on, whether it's vaccinating your kids or whatnot. And then, of course, there's the Chick-fil-A issue. How many people on the left still think that Dan Cathy is out there supporting conservative organizations with Chick-fil-A profits when he's not? But they just hate. I don't understand why they hate a tasty chicken sandwich, but they do. When we come back, Matt Whitaker, the Democrats, they have filed a lawsuit. The Senate Democrats have some audio from them and Amazon. Is Amazon really good for your local community? Conservatives and socialists are actually lining up together on this. We'll be back.
Chad Benson Show. independent in thought, and punk rock in life. It's The Chad Benson Show.
Welcome back. It is Erik Erickson in for Chad Benson. So the Democrats are filing a lawsuit against President Trump and Matt Whitaker. Whitaker, of course, being the acting attorney general. Here is Richard Blumenthal, the senator from Connecticut, talking about this.
There's no justification in the law for saying so. And the Department of Justice, actually, the Office of Legal Counsel, says that there are some kind of special or exigent circumstances that in some cases allow for the president to appoint someone temporarily. But those kinds of circumstances are death or tragedy or crisis, not what we have here. There is no precedent, none, John, for this kind of appointment of someone who is essentially a lackey of the president.
There's actually plenty of precedent for presidents appointing lackeys to various positions. Just because they did not contemplate this as a precedent doesn't mean that the law as written allows it or doesn't allow it. Here's Amy Klobuchar of where is she a senator from? Minnesota.
Well, I support what they did here. And as you noted, this is really similar to the two other lawsuits. And it's saying the same thing. This is not constitutional. One, because for this high-ranking cabinet position of attorney general, we weren't allowed to give our advice and consent. And that secondly, the statute that should have been followed here is the succession statute, which should have trumped, so to say, the one that he used, which was the vacancy one. And it's so clear, he fires Sessions and basically puts Whitaker in the day after the election, so he's not held accountable, and now is claiming that he didn't know about Whitaker's views, which he had so clearly said about how, we could starve this investigation, and an attorney general could, by not providing enough budget money, or actually the absurd statement that there was nothing connecting the Trump campaign to Russia when you have the campaign chair and the national security advisor charged and convicted of things related to Russia.
Now, do you want to know a fun fact here? This was pointed out. Let me give credit where it is due. Andy Grewal, he is a law professor at the University of Iowa, points out that the 1998 Federal Vacancies Reform Act, as proposed originally by Republicans, did not contain the provision that would eventually let Donald Trump make Matt Whitaker the acting attorney general. But Dick Durbin and other Senate Democrats fought to include that sort of provision. They wanted a third category of individuals eligible for temporarily filling vacant positions. That would be qualified individuals who have worked within the agency in which the vacancy occurs for a minimum number of days and who are of a minimum grade level in federal employment. Now, let me just back up here. The president is using the Federal Vacancies Reform Act of 1998 to place Matt Whitaker in the position of acting attorney general, and I actually think it is unconstitutional. I do not have a problem with Matt Whitaker being acting attorney general. Richard Blumenthal can call Matt Whitaker a lackey, but whoever is in that position is going to be someone who is an ally of the president. And I think it is garbage to think that the Attorney General of the United States serves anyone other than the President of the United States. The president is the chief executive of this country. Everyone who works under the president works for the president. That includes the Attorney General of the United States. Yes, I believe in the unitary executive. All power of the executive branch flows from the president of the United States. And if you don't like it, amend the Constitution. But that's the way it is. However, the Constitution also says that principal officers of the United States government must be put in their position with the advice and consent of the Senate. Clarence Thomas, only a few years ago, 3 years ago, in 2015, there was the National Labor Relations Board versus Noel Canning lawsuit. Noel Canning, lawyer the president put in position, claiming that the Congress was in recess and he could make this appointment. Justice Thomas, in a concurrent, said it didn't matter whether there was a recess or not, that was a principal position of the federal government, and the president cannot appoint someone to that position without the advice and consent of Congress, without that person having gone through an advice and consent process. Now, this is not to say the president can't fill positions in the government with an acting attorney general. But I do think that the plain language of the Constitution, that principal officers of the United States have to be put in their position with advice and consent of the Congress, or the Senate rather, means that you can't just put anyone in that position. Whoever you put there has to have gone through the advice and consent process. Now, there are people who say Matt Whitaker during the Bush administration was a U.S. attorney in Iowa and went through the advice and consent process. That's true, but it was a different administration a decade ago. And he was also not at that grade level. Grade level is a pay grade level, a scale of power of an employee, essentially. And within the Department of Justice, he was in Iowa. He wasn't in Washington. He wasn't in the executive department or executive office within the Department of Justice. He wasn't in the sphere of influence of the Attorney General. There are people there. One of them is Ron Rosenstein, who I don't think anyone wants to be Attorney General unless you're a Democrat. There's also the Solicitor General of the United States. Both of them went through the advice and consent process. Matt Whitaker didn't. On constitutional grounds, I think this problem. I don't care that Whitaker's a lackey of the president, as the Democrats say. I don't care that he doesn't like the Mueller investigation. I don't care about those things. I think he'd be totally qualified to be the Attorney General. I just don't think he can be under the Constitution. And if you think otherwise, you need to be concerned. This is one of my big grievances. I shouldn't say grievance, but gripes with Republicans right now. Barack Obama established so many precedents that the Republicans are now using to undermine his legacy. He established so many precedents for the stretching of the president's power without Congress reining him in, and now Donald Trump is using it. This is a precedent Barack Obama never thought he could use. Now, he tried in the ancillary issue of National Labor Relations Board with a lawyer for the National Labor Relations Board, but the president never tried it with a cabinet secretary, let alone the Attorney General of the United States. Think about what President Elizabeth Warren or President Bernie Sanders or President Kamala Harris could do. If this precedent stands, they could put someone in as Attorney General who a majority of Republicans confirm. And then once confirmed, fire that person and appoint someone who could not get Republican consent, who could not get the Senate to consent. It is a terribly dangerous precedent that President Trump is setting if it's allowed to stand. I actually support the Democrats' lawsuit on those grounds. What I think is more interesting is that the Republicans in the Senate, by and large, are relatively silent on this issue. The reason the Republicans in the Senate are silent on this issue is they don't want to pick a fight with President Trump. But a majority of them actually agree with the Democrats on this issue. And they, too, are worried about the precedent of the issue. In fact, Lindsey Graham himself, the incoming chairman of the Judiciary Committee, has said Matt Whitaker is not a good fit for the role. And he believes so on conflict of interest grounds that Matt Whitaker has in the past taken very strong positions on the Mueller investigation, has written extensively on it in the past before becoming the chief of staff to the Attorney General. And you've got Lindsey Graham thinks that biases him in ways that could prevent him from being confirmed. I honestly don't care. At this point, I don't really care about the Mueller investigation. I don't think there's a there with the Mueller investigation. I never have. I never thought they were going to find that the president actively collaborated with the Russians to steal the election. Now, there may be some indictments coming. It's certainly a fishing expedition at this point. There may be some people within the Trump administration who get indicted, some people who even get carted off to jail. Some have already. There have been a number of indictments to come out. But within the president's immediate sphere of influence, none. Maybe there will be. There are some of his kids are thinking they may be targets, but I don't think you're going to find the president has. I don't think you're going to find the president knew what was going on. I don't think you're going to find that the president colluded. And I don't think Mueller can charge the president anyway. I don't think that an underling of the president can be charged with a crime, or that an underling of the president, and Mueller is an underling of the president, he works in the executive branch. I don't think he can charge the president with a crime. You got to impeach him first and remove him from office before that can happen. I think so, under the constitutional structure of this country. I think that has to happen. You know who else does? Brett Kavanaugh. Yeah, Kavanaugh thinks so too. That's going to be problematic. My objection with Whitaker is purely constitutional. That he never went through Senate confirmation process for a senior level within the Department of Justice bureaucracy in Washington, D.C., and under the Constitution, that needs to have happened for him to be able to serve as acting Attorney General. The Constitution supersedes the Federal Vacancy Reform Act. The secession statute that Amy Klobuchar was mentioning, that actually has impact on this as well. That is a federal statute on who can succeed cabinet-level positions, and it seems very clear in that statute that does exist. No one's been talking about it, but she's right, that you have to be someone who has gone through the Senate confirmation process within the tenure of the current presidency in order to be able to replace an existing cabinet secretary. I think that's a true and fair statement. And as a result, I think this is a deeply problematic appointment, and the president probably needs to move on. And we need to move on as well. That is an exhaustive topic. I want to, when we come back, talk about the Amazon situation. Interesting alliance shaping up between conservatives and progressives, socialists even. The Cortez lady who's going to Congress from Brooklyn, I can never remember her name, Ocasio-Cortez. National Review agrees with her. Now, their solutions, their outcomes are different, but the Amazon issue is a big deal that we should discuss when we come back. Erik Erickson in for Chad Benson.
Deep states? No. Deep doo-doo? Yeah. The Chad Benson Show.
Welcome back. It is Erik Erickson in for Chad Benson. I want to talk about Amazon. You know, we dodged a bullet. I'm here in Georgia. I live in Macon, Georgia. I have a radio show in Atlanta, Georgia, and I was a big opponent of Georgia trying to woo Amazon. I think that it was a very bad idea to try to bring Amazon into the state of Georgia, and I think it was a very bad idea for other states to essentially whore themselves out to Amazon.com. They're prostituting their taxpayers to try to get a major Fortune 500 company, one of the largest companies, if not the largest company right now, depending on how Apple stock is done today, largest company in the world, to try to come in by giving them billions of dollars in taxpayer incentives, as opposed to just making their state good for business. Congresswoman-elect Ocasio-Cortez talked about this, and it's worth hearing what she had to say.
It's not just about me governing top down. The reason that I spoke out on this issue to begin with is because organizers and residents of my community were busting down our doors saying, you need to say something about this, because we are threatened with homelessness. We're threatened with rising rents. We have seen this happen in San Francisco and Seattle. We've seen it with Foxconn in the Midwest as well.
Yeah. Rising prices, increased homelessness. You know, just look at the home prices in the San Francisco area. I actually went out, it's been a few months, went out and met with the CEO of a tech company out there, went to his home, and I was actually kind of surprised that he lives in a middle-class neighborhood, does not have a fancy, massive house. Unlike so many of the tech executives out there, he doesn't. And we were actually talking about that, and that this was a decision. He and his wife, they want to live in a residential neighborhood with a normal life. They didn't want to be surrounded by the entourage and have the massive mansions that people see. But he also noted that their house is actually several $1 million, that it would be a house of about, where I live in Middle Georgia, $300,000-$400,000 house, but out there it's several $1 million, and not any land really. And a lot of the tech CEOs are like that as well. They live in these houses that they're, by standards in the Midwest or the South, they're not massive houses, and yet they're $10-15 million because home values in that area have driven up so much. Now, a buddy of mine, hang on a second, I got to find this for you. This is actually worth me doing. My buddy Austin, who lives in San Francisco, it's kind of funny. Every week he sends me a picture of something that has happened near his office, and it always is prefaced with greetings from behind the Iron Curtain. Here we go. There's a huge homelessness problem in California. There's a huge problem in San Francisco, and this just makes me laugh. A plan to redevelop a San Francisco space long occupied by a bunch of greenhouses has stirred neighborhood controversy. A high-density housing plan had been planned, but the neighborhood wants a farm instead. You're living in San Francisco where there are homeless people pooping on the streets, and instead of building a housing complex for these people, you want a farm instead. I guess the thinking is that you could then let the homeless people poop on the farm and fertilize the farm for you, I guess. I mean, maybe you can hire them to like pick the vegetables. This is insane. It is a real issue, and it's one that distorts markets as well. And I think that conservatives need to realize that big business and conservatism do not necessarily go hand in hand. That supporting big business as opposed to business in general isn't a conservative policy these days, because big business colludes with government to pick winners and losers, oftentimes by manipulating the tax code to get themselves economic advantages that they do not want their competition to have. Calvin Coolidge is my favorite president. One of his great quotes is Calvin Coolidge said that the role of government should be to ensure there's a fair and level playing field. And I actually agree with that. I do not think government should pick winners and losers. We should be excited by the prospect of a small company being able to overthrow a large company and itself become a large company and make the large company small. We should be excited by that, the creative destruction of capitalism. And as long as these big companies can collude with the government to prevent that from happening, we're disrupting the markets. Erik Erickson in for Chad Benson. We'll be back.
The Chad Benson Show.
Independent in thoughts and punk rock in life. It's the Chad Benson Show.
Welcome back. It is Erik Erickson in for Chad Benson, the final half hour here. I want to continue on where I was with Amazon. Just a few more minutes here before we move on. And the reason is because I know some of you want to know how do you go about doing this? What should you do? Should states be forced to avoid giving benefits to companies like Amazon? I actually think so. I think that film tax credits, even though here in Georgia where I live, we now produce as many films as Hollywood does, if not more so, because of the tax credit that we give to Hollywood businesses coming into the state. We have huge sound stages being built in Georgia where Hollywood crews, they fly into Georgia, they film movies, and then they leave. I kind of honestly hope that maybe Georgia will pass the Religious Freedom Restoration Act and these Hollywood companies will be serious about their boycott, but they won't be. They threaten to. They threaten us. Georgia is one of only a handful of states that doesn't have RFRA, Religious Freedom Restoration Act. Most states do. In fact, Amazon said it was opposed to Georgia passing RFRA and then went to Virginia and New York, both of which have it. Nonetheless, I think that states, when they focus on picking winners and losers, they oftentimes lose focus on creating a competitive business environment. There are a lot of businesses, and right now, let me just, because I'm in Georgia, and know about the Amazon deal. Georgia offered Amazon $2 billion. Now, Illinois, I believe I read, offered them roughly $7 billion equivalent in tax credits and incentives and whatnot. New York offered them several billion. Tennessee did. It was crazy. The bidding on taxpayer dollars, prostituting taxpayers to try to lure Amazon in. And you know what would happen? In what we're seeing in Georgia, I mentioned earlier the Alan West quote. Alan West was, in fact, let me play this audio for you again just to remind you. This was Alan West this weekend talking about what happened in Texas with it being so close out there.
If you recall, when Governor Rick Perry was here, he was traveling around the country and going to many blue states, and he was talking about moving to Texas because of the economic environment. The conservative policies here have allowed for, the incredible economic growth, and vibrancy. But what is interesting is that as these individuals and these corporations are leaving places like California, Illinois, New York, New Jersey, you have it, they are bringing the same failed ideology with them. And that is what you see that's very disconcerting.
Yes, except he's wrong. And I mean no disrespect to former Congressman West. Except the data, the adjusted exit polling shows very clearly that the people who moved to Texas were more conservative than the white, progressive, longtime Texas residents who live in cities. But there are, in a lot of cases, particularly in Georgia, which has attracted Mercedes-Benz, Porsche, and a number of other Fortune 500 companies to move to Georgia, they also wanted to attract Amazon. They're bringing their employees from up north. They're relocating them to the south, and they haven't equated that, hey, our states were failing, and now we want those same failing policies. It's just that they like the progressive policies. They didn't live there long enough to see the problems, or they could afford to buy their way out of the problems, and they're coming into states like Georgia. That was one of the reasons I opposed Amazon coming to Georgia. They were going to bring a bunch of secular skinny jeans wearing hipsters from Seattle into Atlanta. They were going to displace black families in the inner city and already gentrified neighborhoods by escalating the cost and property value increase, pricing people who have long lived there out of the market. And they were going to bring all their secular, atheist, hipster, coffee, liberalist, frou-frou nonsense to the state. There was no point in doing that. But the fact of the matter is, Georgia has prided itself for a number of years on being good for business. Other states compete. Texas, Florida, Tennessee, South Carolina, Georgia, they're all really competitive on who's the best for business. In the last few years, several independent groups have said Georgia. But here's what's happening. And it's not just in Georgia. It's in your state, too. What's happening is that states, instead of actually building a level playing field, instead of encouraging fair play, instead of making their overall climate friendly for businesses at large, they're picking tax incentives to offer individual business they want to come to the state. And you know who's left holding the bag? The existing business in your state. The mom and pop shop. The medium-sized business in your state capital. The business that is growing and has a competitive advantage against a company like Amazon that will never be able to get there because your state is giving tax dollars to Amazon, not this company. That's who's being left behind. And there is a level of resentment, I think, in the country over that. Amazon doesn't need your tax dollars. Now, I got to be real careful here. I got to be really careful and on point to explain to you here. Amazon did nothing wrong. And I'm not saying Amazon did anything wrong. Who did wrong is your state. Who did wrong is your elected officials. Because they haven't put thought into tax reform. They haven't put thought into deregulating the business environment. They haven't put thought on making the economy more competitive. All they did was put thought on how much money can we offer Amazon to lure it to our state. They've abandoned the field of dreams approach that if you build it, they will come. You know a state that has built an economically competitive environment? South Carolina. South Carolina under Mark Sanford and then Nikki Haley. Interim master continuing it, but really Nikki Haley poured a lot of resources and effort into making the state as business friendly as possible to lure Boeing and other companies to South Carolina without offering massive tax incentives. Texas has also done this. Austin in Texas offered incentives to get Amazon to go to the People's Republic of Austin. The state of Texas did not offer nearly what Austin wanted to offer itself because Texas is Texas. Everybody knows you're going to get a hugely business-friendly environment in Texas. if you move there. Now, what's happening in Texas is interesting because, and this goes back to the Alan West point, there are a lot of businesses relocating to Texas, and people are moving to Texas for those jobs. But by and large, the people who are moving to Texas want to move to Texas because they want Texas values. They're fleeing places like California. You know, progressives look at California as a utopia. Progressives don't see anything wrong with California. If anything, they look at California and they see what's wrong with California is that there are still too many Republicans getting elected. They look at Orange County and the wipeout of Republicans down there, and it affirms to them their whole jungle ballot issue works, the jungle primary, and everybody on the same ballot. They think it all works now. They're driving Republicans out of even Orange County. It really actually is kind of amazing to me. There will be no Republicans in the Orange County delegation headed to Congress, but demographic trend lines. The progressives think this is a good thing. They don't look on California with an eye that it's failed. And that's where a lot of conservatives who are worried about these issues get concerned, and I don't think they should be, that you're not seeing progressives flee these states, moving to free market, conservative southern states and changing those states. What you see are the refugees who are fleeing for a better life, and they understand that the political and socioeconomic atmosphere of those states isn't good. Where the trouble comes in is when the states lure these Fortune 500 companies. And these Fortune 500 companies come in and forcibly relocate their people who would much prefer to live in Seattle in a progressive utopia. And then they get to South Carolina, Tennessee, Kentucky, Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas. They're like, we got to turn this place into our place. They don't respect the values of the local community. That is one area where I think the left is going to run into problems long term. And we see that with the Senate. Have you considered the Senate map for 2020? The Senate map for 2020, with the exception of Maine and Colorado, Susan Collins probably will win re-election. She's hugely popular there, even with the Kavanaugh situation. Cory Gardner is the senator from Colorado. He will be on the ballot in 2020 with Donald Trump. And he's probably the most endangered Republican in 2020. But he'll be offset with Doug Jones. Doug Jones is the senator from Alabama who won in the special election to replace Jeff Sessions. And he's toast. He's got like 80% unpopularity in Alabama right now. He's not going to recover from that. As long as the Republicans don't put Roy Moore up for re-election or for renomination again, Doug Jones is toast. So the Republicans may lose Colorado, but they will gain in Alabama. They will keep the Senate, and they will keep it because you got a lot of states out there who want nothing to do with the progressive utopia of California or New York or Illinois or Washington State. They want to be left alone. They want their values. And I think it is going to hurt Democrats to look on these other states, California, New York, and say, you know what, the way of life in these states is what we should have in the South and the Midwest and the Rust Belt. I think that's going to be deeply problematic for them. But there is hope. Ron Brownstein at CNN, good political analyst, decidedly liberal and decidedly more liberal since Donald Trump became president. He has got an analysis, though. The Democrats have been eyeing the Sun Belt. The Nevada, Southern California, Arizona, New Mexico largely gone to the left anyway. But looking at Arizona, looking at New Mexico, looking at Utah, looking at Nevada, looking at Colorado, looking at West Texas, thinking, you know what, we could make inroads in these places for competitive elections in 2020. And Brownstein actually looks at this and says, you know, the numbers aren't really there for you. In Arizona, Kyrsten Sinema was very, very close. The amount of resources you would have to deploy there to make sure Trump loses, you could actually deploy that money in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and maybe even Ohio, and you could win those states. Now, Ohio, I think, is somewhat of a pipe dream. Look, the Republicans won the governor's race, even though they didn't win the Senate race there. Republicans kept the state legislature. It wasn't because of onerous redistricting and gerrymandering, as the Democrats would have you believe. The Republicans just didn't run a strong candidate for the Senate seat against Sherrod Brown. But Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, all states Donald Trump won, they flipped pretty decisively to the Democrats in gubernatorial and Senate elections, and even in legislative elections in some cases. And Republicans may have a problem there. Remember, the president won with 70,000 votes in those states. And that has huge implications for 2020. Let's discuss them when we come back. Erik Erickson in for Chad Benson.
No fake outrage here, just the real thing. The Chad Benson Show.
It's Erik Erickson in for Chad Benson. So, as I was saying before we went to break, the president won by 70,000 votes. Now, you may be screaming at the radio saying he lost the popular vote. Yes, the president lost the popular vote, but presidents get elected by the Electoral College. And he won Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania with 70,000 votes, giving him the Electoral College, giving him the win. The question Republicans are going to have to ask themselves, and this gets to what I mentioned earlier, Ron Brownstein's column at CNN, have they gained or lost 70,000 votes? And Brownstein's point, and I think he's right, is that given how flipped Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan went for the Democrats, it may be safe to conclude the president has lost more votes there than he's gained. He certainly hasn't held 70,000 votes. And that puts his reelection at risk unless he figures out a way to get those suburbs back. But there's a catch for the Democrats. And it wasn't intended. I did not intend to do some sort of thematic segment on this from Amazon to this. But there is a real issue here with the Democrats in these states trying to take a position of imposing their values and way of life on other states. Pennsylvania is not California. Michigan is not New York. Wisconsin is not New Mexico. And the values of these liberal bastions imposed on those states isn't going to go over well. And we know this. We saw this when Barack Obama became president. The people of those states reacted pretty overwhelmingly and put into place not only Republican state legislatures, they put into place Republican congressional delegations, Republican senators, Republican governors. Now, the pushback is happening. Democratic voters mobilized in those states pushing back. But those people are pushing back more against the president. I mean, look at the legislatures in these places. They didn't just completely go upside down. Wisconsin maintained Republican legislative leads, though Scott Walker lost in a very, very close race, I might add, for Scott Walker. But the Democrats in those states are not suddenly claiming that they want San Francisco's values or Los Angeles' values or Seattle's values or Portland's values or Santa Fe's values or New York City's values. They want their own values. They just don't like Trump. They think Republicans are misguided. If the president can make inroads with the people in those states, if the president can show them that he can change his ways, I don't know that he can, but if he tries, he may be able to neutralize Democratic gains in those states. It's a real concern that the Republicans are going to have to deal with when it comes to 2020. They do have a problem with those Midwestern states along the Great Lakes. They're going to have to figure out a way to reassure those suburban voters that the president and the Republicans not just want them, but need them and will give them some level of stability. A lot of those suburban voters there are just tired of fighting. They're tired of the culture war. They want to be left alone. And if they can see that the president and the Republicans are willing to leave them alone, I suspect that'll be a far compelling alternative to the San Francisco Antifa crowd that is now going to run the House of Representatives for the Democrats. Seeing Nancy Pelosi out there demanding a leftward turn is going to be interesting. Do you know I read somewhere that Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats are thinking they want to ban Chick-fil-A being served in the House of Representatives because it is considered offensive to progressives? I still, as I mentioned earlier, I do not understand what people have against a pickle between two buttered buns and a nice chicken sandwich. I don't get it. I would think they would like it, but they don't. So there will be culture war there. Now, before we get out of here, before I run out of time, just a moment, please, to be reflective and thoughtful. I get to go on vacation for the rest of this week as well. It is Thanksgiving. I have traveled more than 100,000 miles this year. I am platinum on Delta for the next year, and I'm exhausted from it. So what we do every year, I tend to travel so much. We invite my entire family over from Louisiana, Tennessee, and Mississippi to my place in Georgia. We house them. We feed them. We do all the cooking and cleaning for them so that I don't have to travel. We're going to have a ton of fun, and a lot of eating. You can follow me on Instagram at EW Erickson or Twitter. I'll be putting up recipes, I'm sure. But I just want to reflect for a moment on thankfulness. I have mentioned that 2 years ago, my wife, well, I in particular, was on the verge of dying. Blood clots in my lungs, a significant number of them. My wife diagnosed with an incurable form of cancer. Thankfully, she has a small pill from the miracle of modern medicine we are quite thankful for that keeps it in remission. But there's a lot to be thankful for right now. And I don't mean politically. Health and job and family. But there are people out there in this holiday season who can't find things to be thankful for. They're depressed. They're unhappy. They feel like life has let them down. They've been dealt a bad hand. And I want to encourage you within your friends. People, this is one of the downsides of social media, I really do think. People put up happy pictures. Last night I ruined a cake. I made sure to put it up on Instagram along with my messy office so that no one could accuse me of only putting the best stuff up. But there are a lot of people who look at social media and they see everybody's happy, perfect life and your happy, perfect pictures of your happy, perfect family, and your family's not perfect. And I would just encourage you to seek out those friends of yours who may be down this holiday season and maybe invite them to the table, break bread with them, spend time with them, make sure they know they're loved, and remind them that they too have things to be thankful for. This is a very easy time of year for people to be depressed. And make it your mission to cheer someone up this year. Be thankful for all your blessings and make them thankful for you, if nothing else. So thank you for spending these couple of days with me. Thanks to Chad for letting me fill in. I am Erik Erickson. This is the Chad Benson Show. Have a great Thanksgiving.
This is the Chad Benson Show.